In the summer of the year 378, the Roman Empire marched toward the plains of Thrace, convinced it would crush a revolt of starving refugees. Their legions gleamed under the August sun. Their banners waved with the pride of centuries of conquest. 25,000 men, veterans of wars against Persians and barbarians, advanced toward what they believed would be an easy victory. But beyond the hills, something awaited them. On the heights, behind a circle of wagons forming an improvised fortress, thousands of eyes watched the Roman column approach. They were not desperate refugees, they were warriors. Warriors who had crossed the Danube, fleeing the terror of the Huns, only to find hunger, slavery, and humiliation in Roman lands. And now, under the command of Fritigern, they had stopped running. When the first Roman units attacked without formation, the horizon exploded. Gothic cavalry descended from the mountains like thunder. Spears pierced shields, swords whistled against armor. The Roman flanks crumbled. The infantry became trapped. The legionaries, so compressed they could not raise their swords, died standing. Bodies piled into grotesque mounds. The wounded screamed for water while suffocating beneath the weight of the dead. And somewhere in that hell of dust and blood, the Emperor of Rome himself vanished forever. When the sun set over Adrianople, 2/3 of the Eastern Roman army lay dead. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus would later write that since the massacre at Cannae, 500 years before, never had such slaughter been witnessed. And the echo of that afternoon would travel through the centuries to become the first domino that would topple the Western Roman Empire. This is the story of how it happened. To understand the catastrophe of Adrianople, we must go back 2 years to the moment when fate began to weave itself. In the year 376, the steppes of the north burned with a new terror. From the depths of Central Asia, a wave of horsemen had emerged like a plague upon the land. The Huns. No one knew exactly where they came from or why they had decided to move westward. All that the peoples in their path knew was that there was no way to stop them. The Goths, a warrior people who had inhabited the lands north of the Black Sea for generations, were the first to feel the blow. Their villages were razed, their families massacred or scattered. Those who survived had no choice but to flee south, toward the Danube River, toward the frontier of the only power they believed capable of protecting them, the Roman Empire. They arrived by the tens of thousands, men, women, children, elderly. Carrying what little they had left, they crossed the frozen fields of winter to the banks of the great river. From the opposite shore, the Roman border posts watched with unease as that human tide grew day after day. Emperor Valens ruled the eastern half of the empire from Constantinople. He was a man of 50 years, experienced in administration, but not particularly brilliant in war. When messengers informed him about the Gothic refugees, he saw an opportunity. These people could be settled on empty lands in Thrace. They could pay taxes. They could, above all, provide fresh recruits for an army that always needed more soldiers. Valens gave the order, allow the Goths to cross the Danube. It was a decision that seemed reasonable. Rome had integrated barbarian peoples before, but what Valens did not foresee was the brutal corruption of his own officials. Lupicinus, the military governor of Thrace, saw in the refugees a personal gold mine. He knew these people were desperate. He knew he controlled the only available provisions, and he decided to squeeze every last coin from their suffering. The Goths, who had arrived with hopes of protection, found extortion instead. Food prices skyrocketed to impossible levels. Entire families sold their own children as slaves in exchange for dog meat. Hunger spread like a plague through the refugee camps, and with hunger grew something more dangerous, rage. The breaking point came at Marcianopolis. Lupicinus invited the Gothic leaders, Fritigern and Alavivus, to a banquet. While they ate, their warriors were attacked outside the walls. It was a trap, but Fritigern was too clever to fall for it. He escaped the city, and from that moment, declared open war against Rome. For the next 2 years, the Goths ravaged Thrace. They sacked villages, they burned crops, they freed thousands of Gothic slaves who had been sold by corrupt Roman officials, and those slaves provided invaluable information about where to find food, weapons, and shelter. Roman attempts to stop them failed again and again. At the Battle of Ad Salices, the Goths withstood the legion's assault until a bloody stalemate was reached. Valens, occupied with a war against the Persians on the eastern frontier, received increasingly alarming reports. Constantinople itself began to fear. The citizens demanded action. The emperor had no choice but to abandon the Persian campaign and return west. He arrived in Constantinople on the 30th of May in the year 378. He was in a hurry. His nephew Gratian, the young Western emperor, had recently achieved a brilliant victory against the Alemanni on the Rhine. Gratian's military glory overshadowed Valens, who had never achieved a truly memorable victory. Jealousy consumed him. When scouts reported that the Goths were camped near Adrianople with only 10,000 warriors, Valens saw his opportunity, a quick and decisive victory before Gratian arrived, all the glory for himself alone. His generals advised him to wait. Gratian was sending reinforcements. Richomeres, the commander of the Western Imperial Guard, arrived with an urgent letter from his nephew. Do not attack without him. Valens rejected the advice. On the 9th of August, in the year 378, before dawn, the Roman army marched out from the walls of Adrianople. Valens had left the imperial treasury and administration inside the city, protected by a garrison. He took with him approximately 20,000 soldiers, veteran legions, imperial cavalry, mounted archers, and auxiliaries. They marched north, toward the Gothic camp that scouts had located 25 kilometers away. The day was brutal. The August sun beat down without mercy. There were no clouds to offer respite. The legionaries advanced under the weight of their armor, dust clinging to their sweaty faces, thirst beginning to bite at their throats. The 8-mile march through difficult terrain exhausted the men before they even saw the enemy. When they finally spotted the Gothic camp, the sun was at its zenith. What they saw was exactly what they expected. A circle of wagons forming an improvised fortress atop a hill. The wagons contained the Gothic families, women and children who had followed the warriors from the Danube. Behind that wooden wall, the Goths waited, but there was something the Roman scouts had not reported, something crucial. The Gothic cavalry, thousands of Ostrogothic horsemen under the command of Alathius and Saphrax, had gone out to search for provisions days before. They were not in the camp when the Romans conducted their reconnaissance, and at that moment, as the legions deployed under the scorching sun, those horsemen were racing back at full speed from the eastern hills. Fritigern knew this. Valens did not. The Gothic leader decided to buy time. He sent emissaries to the Roman camp, proposing negotiations. He offered peace in exchange for lands where his people could settle. Valens, with his troops exhausted and thirsty, agreed to parley. Perhaps he genuinely considered the options. Perhaps he simply needed his men to rest before attacking. While the emissaries went back and forth, something went wrong. 2 Roman cavalry units, without waiting for orders, launched a premature attack on the Gothic camp. Perhaps it was impatience, perhaps it was the heat, perhaps it was simple indiscipline, but the result was catastrophic. The Goths easily repelled the uncoordinated attack, and suddenly negotiations ended. Valens ordered the general assault, but his troops were not in formation. The infantry arrived at the battle line in scattered groups. The rear guard was still marching when the front was already fighting. There was no cohesion, there was no order. Only chaos under a sun that gave no quarter. The Roman left wing managed to advance. It pushed the Goths back to the circle of wagons. For a moment, victory seemed possible. The legionaries shouted with renewed energy. The imperial standard waved forward, and then the horizon thundered. The Gothic cavalry had arrived. Alathius and Saphrax descended from the eastern hills with the fury of an avalanche. Ammianus Marcellinus, the historian who would document the battle, wrote that they came down like a thunderbolt. Thousands of horsemen struck the Roman right flank with a violence that no tactical formation could withstand. The left wing, which had advanced successfully, suddenly found itself isolated. Without support from the Roman cavalry, which began to retreat, the legionaries were left exposed. The Goths surrounded them. What followed was a nightmare. The Roman infantry, trapped between the Gothic cavalry and the warriors descending from the wagon camp, compressed into an ever smaller space. The men became so tightly packed they could not raise their arms to swing their swords. Some died standing, held upright by the bodies of their comrades. Shields became useless. Formations, which had been Rome's strength for centuries, became death traps. Dust mixed with blood. The noise was deafening. Gothic war cries, Roman screams of agony, the clash of metal against metal, and above it all, the relentless heat of August. The Goths gave no quarter. They struck with spears, swords, and axes. Romans who fell were trampled by those still fighting. Bodies piled into grotesque mounds. The wounded, trapped beneath the weight of the dead, begged for water while slowly suffocating, the longest 5 hours in Roman history. Valens tried to rally his men. He was seen riding through the chaos, shouting orders that no one could hear. His personal guards fell one after another. At some point, an arrow or a spear struck him. He was last seen being dragged toward a small peasant cottage, wounded and surrounded by a handful of survivors. The Goths found the cottage. The Romans inside shot arrows from the windows, trying to defend themselves. The Goths responded with fire. They set the building ablaze. The wooden walls burned quickly. The screams from within lasted only moments. An imperial bodyguard managed to jump from a window. When the Goths captured him, he told them who had been inside, but it was too late. The Emperor of Rome had died, consumed by the flames. His body would never be recovered. When the sun began to set, the battle ended. Not because the Romans surrendered, but because there were almost no Romans left alive to fight. The battlefield was a landscape of nightmare. Bodies piled so high they formed hills of flesh and metal. Bright armor now blackened by dried blood. Broken standards lying in the dust. The smell of iron and death permeated the hot air. The Goths walked among the fallen, searching for survivors to finish off and trophies to claim. The few Romans who managed to escape fled toward the nearby forests and hills, some eventually reaching the walls of Adrianople. Of the approximately 20,000 soldiers who had marched that morning, only a third survived. 35 tribunes, high-ranking officers had fallen alongside countless centurions and veterans. The Eastern Roman field army had ceased to exist. Fritigern surveyed the carnage with a mixture of triumph and caution. He had defeated the Roman emperor. But he knew that stone walls were an enemy his warriors could not overcome. When he attempted to take Adrianople in the following days, the city held firm. Without siege machinery, the Goths were forced to withdraw, but the damage was done. The news of Adrianople spread throughout the empire like a plague. In the cities of the Mediterranean, citizens panicked. St. Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan, predicted the end of humanity. Markets collapsed. Borders trembled. For the first time since Hannibal had crossed the Alps, Rome seemed genuinely vulnerable. The young Emperor Gratian received the news while marching with his reinforcements. Too late, too far away. The glory his uncle had so desperately sought had become the greatest military disgrace of the imperial era. In the years that followed, Rome would never truly regain control of the situation. Theodosius, the new Eastern Emperor, eventually managed to sign a treaty with the Goths in the year 382. But that treaty acknowledged something unprecedented. The Goths would live within the empire as a semi-autonomous people governed by their own chiefs, fighting as allies but not as subjects. It was the beginning of a new order, or perhaps the beginning of the end of the old. 32 years after Adrianople, in the year 410, a Visigothic horde under the command of Alaric entered Rome. They sacked the Eternal City for 3 days. Among those warriors were men whose fathers had fought on that hill in Thrace, men who had grown up hearing stories of how their ancestors had destroyed the legions and killed an emperor. Adrianople did not destroy the Roman Empire, but it revealed its cracks. It demonstrated that heavy infantry, the backbone of Roman domination for centuries, could be annihilated by barbarian cavalry. It showed that corruption and arrogance could turn potential allies into deadly enemies. And it proved that even the greatest empires can fall when they underestimate those they consider inferior. The historian Ammianus Marcellinus, who lived through those times and documented the battle in meticulous detail, wrote a phrase that would echo through the centuries. Since the Battle of Cannae, never had the annals recorded such slaughter. He compared Adrianople to the day when Hannibal had annihilated 50,000 Romans on the plains of Italy 500 years before. But there was a crucial difference. After Cannae, Rome rose stronger. After Adrianople, Rome began its slow descent into oblivion. Today, the city of Edirne stands upon the ruins of ancient Adrianople. The field where 20,000 Romans died under the August sun is now farmland, quiet beneath the Turkish sky. There are no grand monuments. There are no statues of emperors. Only the wind blowing over the fields as it has blown for 1,600 years, carrying with it the echo of that afternoon when an empire learned it was not invincible. And somewhere beneath that earth, mixed with the dust of centuries, lie the bones of an emperor whose body was never found, and of 20,000 soldiers whose only crime was following him into a battle that should never have been fought. Because sometimes history is not written by the victorious. Sometimes history is written by those who learned too late that pride can be more deadly than any sword. And the echo of Adrianople still resounds, reminding us that all empires, no matter how great, eventually find their August afternoon.